Hi, everyone. And thank you, everyone, for coming in person and online. I know as well as Melbourne joiners, we have people from Sydney and from Brisbane as well. Oh, hey, RAC Sydney. Nice to see you. And yeah, my name is Mariota. I'm a member of Refugee Action Collective, and I'll be chairing tonight. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge the true owners of the land that we are on, which was never ceded, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and we pay our respect to elders past, present, and emerging. And as we discuss refugee rights tonight, I'd also like to acknowledge that at RAC, we see the fight for refugee rights and the right for First Nations justice as closely connected, namely by imperialism and racism, historical and present. There is no refugee justice without First Nations justice. We've called this forum tonight to discuss Labour's treatment of refugees, following a new brutal set of laws that were passed in November. These amendments to the Immigration Act place many refugees at risk of deportation and at risk of great harm if they are forcibly returned to the countries from which they fled. To help us understand the impact of these bills and what we can do about it, we have the panel of experts. Rathy Barthlote over here is a leader of the refugee rights movement in Australia. I don't know if they can still hear me online if it's moved. So Rathy leads Women Action for Visa Equality and is a member of the Tamil Refugee Council. She was one of the organisers of the 100-day encampment for refugees stuck in visa limbo last year. Josephine Langbien is an Associate Legal Director at the Human Rights Law Centre in Melbourne, with which she was part of the campaign against Labour's new laws. And Kieran Magee is a long-standing refugee activist and a member of Refugee Action Collective. And further to the campaign against these laws, he was involved in the protest at the Park Hotel in 2020. Please join me in welcoming our speakers. We'll start off tonight with information from a lawyer who knows the most.
Hello, everyone, and hi, everyone online. Thank you so much for having me. It's a real privilege to be here. Thank you for your lovely introduction. As Mariota mentioned, my name is Josephine. I'm a lawyer at the Human Rights Law Centre. I'm here to talk you through in a little more detail exactly what happened last year, exactly what these new laws do. And so I'm going to try and whiz through a whole lot of information pretty quickly. I'm going to keep it relatively high level, but if there's more detail, I'm sure we can get into that in the question time, if that's helpful. So let's start off with what exactly happened. As has already been mentioned, in November last year, it was the final sitting days of Parliament when Labor and the Coalition teamed up to pass some of the harshest anti-migrant laws that we've seen in potentially decades. This happened so quickly that many people missed it. It was towards the end of the year. A lot of other things were going on in Parliament. So it did escape some people's attention. The new laws that were passed are also so broad and created so many new powers that even if you did hear about this happening, you may not have appreciated quite all of the aspects of these new laws. So I'm going to break that down in a little more detail, but to start, remember that a little over a year ago, the High Court ended indefinite immigration detention, or the lawfulness of indefinite immigration detention through a court decision that you might have heard called NZYQ. That was a positive step. It did the bare minimum of saying that our government can't lock people up for the rest of their lives. But that court decision has been used as the basis for relentless political attacks from right-wing politicians and the media ever since. And the ALP, unfortunately, instead of standing up for its stated values, instead of defending the decision of the court, instead of asserting that migrants and refugees are entitled to the same standards of treatment and dignity as everybody else. Instead, the ALP has capitulated to this pressure, and it's contributed to the fear-mongering and stoking of community concerns in an attempt to look tough. So that's what's motivated these new laws. And, you know, this is not only really blatant cruelty, it's also not particularly politically smart for Labor to try and outflank the coalition on the right. But moving on, what do the new laws do? So Parliament passed 3 bills: the Migration Amendment Bill, the Migration Removals and Other Measures Bill, and the Prohibiting Items in Immigration Detention Bill. This created a suite of new powers. I won't talk through all of them, but these are the 6 sort of key aspects. And I've sort of grouped them broadly into two parts. These first 4 new powers are really aimed at increasing the government's ability to deport people from Australia, so breaking down the barriers that are preventing the government from removing people. And then the others are aimed at making life harder for people who remain here. So the first thing I want to talk about, perhaps the most shocking aspect and the part that has attracted the most attention, at least in recent weeks, is the new ability for the Australian government to enter into agreements with other countries to effectively pay those countries to accept people that the Australian government wants to deport. So this is the government's solution to what it perceives to be a problem of people who can't be returned to their country of origin because they're refugees or they're stateless, or because there's some other practical reason that they can't be returned to their country of origin, but who no longer have a visa in Australia. As you've probably heard, the first country that the government has struck such an agreement with is, unsurprisingly, Nauru. This isn't surprising for a number of reasons, including because we've already got the RPC infrastructure in Nauru. The government's already funneling a lot of money to Nauru, so I don't think anyone was shocked to see that as the first country to be announced. The government has said that its immediate target for the people that it wants to remove under these new powers are the people who were released from immigration detention after the decision in NZYQ. But it's easy to see why people in other circumstances are incredibly concerned right now about who might be next and who else could be targeted by these new powers. There's a lot of people in other precarious visa situations in Australia who, you know, very, very fairly are really concerned right now. This is where the government started. We don't know where they will stop or who might be targeted next. The issues, the dangers of deporting people to a place like Nauru really barely need to be said aloud. I think everybody here is probably really familiar with the kinds of horrors that people have suffered on Nauru, people who've previously been sent there by the Australian government. That's really, really clear. And there's just no legal protection for people who could potentially be deported to Nauru under these new powers. There's no guarantee that they'll be safe in Nauru or any other country. There's no guarantee that they won't be placed in detention in that third country. There's no guarantee that they won't be subsequently returned to their country of origin from that place. So these are really, really concerning potential consequences. And you may have heard that just 2 weeks ago, the government attempted to use these powers for the first time and attempted to remove 3 men to Nauru. Those 3 individuals were really obviously chosen with the specific goal of trying to make sure that the public didn't feel any sympathy for those people. But in my view, there's no circumstances that can justify this kind of government action. And they can't be used to set a really dangerous precedent for the kind of treatment that we think is acceptable for people who are migrants and refugees. So each of those 3 people who were scheduled for deportation to Nauru have filed court cases. All 3 of them have temporary reprieve, so they've managed to delay their deportations. But their fight continues. They are by no means permanently safe, and we don't know whether others will soon be targeted, but for now, their deportations have been delayed. I'll just whiz through... Apologies. I'll just whiz through some of the other powers that these new laws have introduced. So these other new powers are really designed to put pressure on people in other countries to avoid roadblocks to deportations back to people's country of origin. So the government now has the ability to issue removal directions to some people, instructing people to take certain steps that might facilitate their own deportations. So that might be things like instructing someone to apply for a passport or to provide certain information about their family or their identity. Failing to comply with those directions is a criminal offence. And that's a criminal offence that comes with a mandatory minimum sentence of 1 year in prison. So criminalising what people have, for decades and decades done in many different circumstances, which is standing up and resisting being torn from their homes, from their communities, from their families, and resisting their own deportation, is now a crime. The minister also has the power to impose travel bans on an entire country of people, preventing any national from that country from applying for any Australian visa, with some really limited exceptions for family visas or humanitarian visas. So this is real Trump-style politics, very obviously, and this has been designed as like a diplomatic pressure tool for the Australian government to use in negotiations with countries who presently refuse to accept the forced return of their own citizens. The third dot point up there, increased powers to strip refugee status. So the government already had the power to reopen and overturn protection findings for certain people who were in immigration detention. That power has now been expanded and it now applies to people on certain types of bridging visas. Not all bridging visas, but some. And then the final 2 aspects that I wanted to cover are 2 new ways that the government can impose punishment and harsh treatment on people while they're still in Australia. So you may have heard about the bridging R visas that people previously held in indefinite immigration detention have been released onto these really restrictive bridging R visas. They were previously issued with conditions including nightly curfews and constant electronic monitoring via an ankle monitor, an ankle bracelet. As you can imagine, curfews are really just another form of immigration detention, and ankle monitors are deeply stigmatising. These are horribly punitive conditions which the High Court really recently said were unconstitutional and could not be imposed. So the new laws, the government gave itself the power once again to reimpose those conditions under a slightly amended legal test. And finally, just the last thing to mention is you might recall that the previous coalition government tried, I think, at least 3 times to pass laws that would allow it to ban mobile phones in immigration detention. It wasn't able to do that because Labor had previously opposed those laws. Now it has passed them. And so this is giving the government the power to ban almost any item in immigration detention, anything that could be perceived in any way to be a threat, including mobile phones. So I think it's now only a matter of time before we see that rolled out. The government says that it will guarantee access to alternative means of communication, but I think we all know that a landline is just no substitute for a mobile phone that's also the internet and a camera and can make international calls and all kinds of things. So that's the new laws in a nutshell. What do we do? What do we do?
I just met someone who.
Yes. Oh, sorry. I should have been keeping an eye on that. I think it's important to note some of the things that have already been done. There was really, really strong community resistance to these laws, which Rathy will be able to speak more to. Even though these laws were rushed through so quickly, people mobilised and spoke up and made sure that our politicians were crystal clear that the community recognised this for what it was. This was an anti-migrant attack, and it was an abandonment of multicultural communities in Australia. And of course, we've seen the legal challenges to the first deportation attempts. But legal action isn't going to be a total solution to these new laws. It may not even be any solution. We don't know how these 3 court cases are going to go. So the most important things for all of us to do from here, in my opinion, is we need to make sure that people in our community are aware of and understand the new laws, because they're new and they're complex. Not everybody's grasped the gravity of them. We also have very little indication of how the government is going to use these new powers, and exactly what the impacts are going to be. So we need to be vigilant. We need to keep an eye out. We need to look out for things like more attempted deportations to Nauru, people receiving these removal directions, telling them to comply with their deportation. Look out for attempts to take away mobile phones in detention, so that we can act quickly and respond. That's okay. We don't need to. Sorry. So I've said here that this is our alert but not alarmed point of action. And yeah, as always, we need to stand with the people who are impacted by these laws and raise our voices in opposition to these and all of the other cruel and discriminatory aspects of our migration framework. We really need to demand better from our politicians, because everybody has the same rights and should have the same basic dignity and freedom, regardless of their visa status. So that's a lightning fast rundown on the laws themselves, and I'll hand over to Rathy. Thank you so much.
After I hear this one, make me hear. Anyway, hello everyone. I'm Rathy Barthlote. Nice to see you. Thank you for the opportunity for me to speaking today. I want to acknowledge the land we meet on today. I pay my respect to elders past, present, and emerging. This land always were and always will be Aboriginal land. We are refugees, people created by imperialist wars and global power struggles. We are the remnants of your war, left without a home, without dreams, struggling to survive. We fled persecution, ethnic and religious hatred, and arrived seeking safety only to find ourselves trapped in limbo. As Elam Tamil, our journey has been marked by destruction, displacement, and the loss of our homeland. For generations, we have been forced to live as refugees, stripped of our rights and our dignity and our place in the world. We were driven out of our ancestral land, subjected to unimaginable suffering, and denied the right to return. For over 30 years, our people have endured immense pain. The bloodshed and traumas of war still linger in our homeland, leaving behind wounds that refuse to heal. In 2009, the Sri Lankan state committed genocide against Tamils. As a result, thousands of Elam Tamils sought refuge in countries like Australia. Even after the war ended, the Sri Lankan state continues in operation, abducting Tamil under the guise of investigation, subjecting them to brutal torture and sexual violence. International human rights organizations, including the UN and the International Truth and Justice Project, ITJP, have documented these atrocities. To this day, our missing loved ones remain unaccounted for. Tamil ancestral lands are being taken over, and new Buddhist temples are being forcefully established in our homeland to erase our identity. Our way of life is being disrupted. Our culture is under attack, and our future generations are being deliberately destroyed through the of drugs. The spread of drugs and systematic oppression. The same racist government that rules Sri Lanka today is the one that endorsed the massacres of Tamils in 1983 and blocked peace negotiations. They called and supported Rajapaksa genocidal action against Tamils, continued to Draconian anti-terror law against Tamils, re-imprisonment former political prisoners, and have even created watch lists for Tamil refugees returning from abroad, leading to immediate arrest at the airport. Just last week, they banned numerous Tamil rights groups in the diaspora. Despite knowing all this, Australia, while presenting itself as a defender of refugee rights, has signed international agreement but refused to grant us protection. For over 12 years, we have been left in limbo, denied permanent residency, and forced to live with uncertainty. We are mentally and physically extorted, suffering from extreme stress and trauma, separated from our loved ones for years. Many of us have developed several mental health conditions. How many more lives must be lost before action is taken? Even today, we have lost another member of our community to this injustice. What was our crime? Why must our children suffer like this? With nothing left to lose, 22 refugee women took action in September 2023, marching on foot from Melbourne to Canberra to protest Australia anti-refugee policies. This was followed by a 100-day protest from July to October, where we endured extreme weather conditions demanding permanent visas. Our protest gained the support of people from different backgrounds, yet we still have not received a solution. 12 years is not just a number, it's a lifetime of living in a fear, uncertainty, and oppression. And yet our future remains a question mark. We demanded justice and dignity, but all we have received is betrayal. In 2022, the Labour government promised change. They called the fast-track visa system unfair and vowed to abolish it. Yet today, 9,500 refugees remain in limbo. Our lives have not changed. We are still prisoners in this open-air detention. We have committed no crime. For 12 years, we have been part of this society, contributing to it. But the wound and our bodies and minds remain deep. Despite all this, we are not defeated. We are not giving up. We will continue to fight. Until the government listens to our voices, we will not remain silent. Until they give us a permanent solution, our struggle will continue. We are waiting, but not in silence, not in submission. We will amplify our voices, intensify our resistance, and demand our rights. This fight is not just ours. It is a struggle between the powerful and the oppressed, between the government and the people, between justice and injustice. Until the permanent visas are granted to all 9,500 refugees, we will not stop. To everyone standing with us all today, you are our strength. Your dedication and support fuel our struggle. You understand that when injustice happens to any group of people, it is the responsibility of all to speak out. We will win our rights. This is our promise, our path. Thank you so much.
It's a really great speech. Thank you.
I'm really sorry for that. My emotion gets.
And thank you, Rathy, for such a powerful speech. It's that lived experience that we don't know until it is shared, and it's that lived experience that governments over the decades have been trying to hide from everyone. So that is why we thank you so much for coming out and sharing that. And then, yeah, it's hard to follow, but I'll do my best. And I also acknowledge that we are on land that was never ceded, and that the struggle against the policies that target people seeking asylum is aligned with the ongoing struggle for justice for Indigenous people of Australia. I want to focus on the political background of Labor's deportation policy, the disgraceful later steps in Australia's long and appalling history in the treatment of people seeking asylum. Josephine's provided a very great summary of the legal impact, and we've seen the personal impact, which is hard, just being hard to follow. But I want to follow on the politics, on what's been done, how we oppose them, and how we defeat these sorts of actions that have been implemented by the government. We've successfully done so on previous occasions, and we can do so again. So there's a long history of fear-mongering about refugees. Politicians, traditional media, and social media have all contributed. Politicians want a distraction from the real issues over the housing crisis, the Medicare system. They want to distract from it, and they want to seek fear. Traditional media want to hold on to a diminishing audience, or diminishing viewers, diminishing readers, by saying there is something to be afraid of, and there's nothing greater to hold on to that audience by telling you that there's something to be afraid of, even when it's a lie. And social media thrives on outrage. The algorithms work by outrage, and nothing drives outrage and builds advertising revenue for those social media companies than fear, regardless of the truth. It is an absolutely appalling situation when the Liberals are bragging, accurately unfortunately, from opposition that they are driving the immigration and refugee policies in Australia, and Labor should be ashamed of that, thoroughly and absolutely ashamed. I don't expect high principles from Labor. Politics is a messy business. I don't expect high principles, but I do expect Labor to be in government and to run the policies themselves. And then we can work on those. I did not expect to have to oppose the Liberals when they were in opposition. Labor really should be focusing on, if they want to focus on safety and they're creating fear, if Labor really wants to focus on safety, they should focus on the real attack on the rule of law. The real attack on the rule of law that is being escalated and propagated by the Liberals and by the Conservatives and by the media companies. 70,000 people are released from jail every year in Australia without the country falling into anarchy. It is not 220 people who have already been held for a longer period of time than the sentence that they were given that are going to cause a problem for Australia. Remember, that is less than 1/3 of 1% of all the people that are released from jail each year. And no one in the media is talking about that. You can emphasise the crimes that someone has committed, but we release people from jail every day of the week. If we are talking about those who have been convicted, if they have done a crime, they were charged, they had a court hearing, they pleaded guilty, or they were found guilty, and they were given a sentence by an independent judge, not a politician, not a minister, and not some hidden public service. There was a rule of law followed. If we allow governments and the opposition who somehow runs this policy to undermine the rule of law, that is the real risk to safety. That is the real risk to our society, not 220 people who have gone through the legal system that apparently we should be proud of. Society, the rule of law was followed. Society was kept safe. People received a punishment, were given an appropriate, and were given an opportunity, however flawed, for rehabilitation. And that is the rule of law. There's a lot of flaws in that system. I'm not saying it's perfect, but arguably that is what Labor should be upholding. And that is what Labor should be attacking the Liberals for, of undermining. Undermining this system with arbitrary punishment for people who have served their sentence simply based on the accident of their place of birth. Simply based on where they were born. They are people, they deserve the same protections under the rule of law as all of us. Labor could attack the Liberals for creating fear when there is no reason. Labor could attack the Liberals for undermining the pillars of our legal system, creating double punishments for people that have already been dealt with by the legal system. Labor could attack the Liberal Party for denying people the chance to rehabilitate themselves. Denying themselves the chance to, in the words of a former notorious Liberal Prime Minister, denying them the chance to have a go and get a go. Yeah, that's apparently a Liberal value. Labor should be attacking the Liberals for denying people the opportunity for that denying the chance for that opportunity. Labor could address the Australian people and ask if they want to be fed fear stories, lies from legacy media that just want to hold on to a diminishing audience or to feed social media algorithms, or do they want the truth? And yet Labor have simply followed the Liberals into a deeper morass of appalling, cruel and vindictive policies that are not needed, that do harm not only to our legal system, but also to the very people involved and to the communities where fear is created. Legitimate fear, I should say. An appeal to the worst instincts of our natures, rather than the often quoted Australian values of a fair go. That's what Labor could be doing. So the pure hypocrisy of the making Australia a safer place argument, when, if you actually believe in that line of thinking, it means making vulnerable countries less safe. In reality, it just continues a history of exploitation, corruption and undermining of Pacific countries. The Prime Minister said in April 2022, an Albanese Labor government will restore Australia's place as the partner of choice for the countries in the Pacific. Our shared challenges and achieve our shared goals. Noble words, nice words, but followed by disgraceful actions. Labor's hypocrisy with this policy is obvious. When Tony Burke said earlier this month, describing the first 3 visas that Josephine was talking about for issued to Nauru, when someone has come and treated Australia in a way that shows appalling character, their visas do get cancelled. But are they such a risk to Australia? Remembering 70,000 people get released from prison every year without society falling apart. 200 people, the cohort that were in detention after serving their sentence. Are they such a risk to Australia with its population of 26 million? Are they such a risk to Australia with its over 65,000 police officers? Are they such a risk to Australia with its access to parole bodies, access to drug and alcohol services, access to rehabilitation services, however adequately resourced or inadequately resourced and sometimes flawed these services may be? We have structures and systems in place in a rich and in a rich country like Australia. If you believe that there is a risk to Australia and yet you want to build a stronger Pacific family with shared values and shared goals, how do you square that hypocrisy? And that is the hypocrisy that Labor is showing. And that is the hypocrisy that we need to call Labor out on and that the media needs to call Labor out on. When you send these people to Nauru with a population less than 12,000, less than the number of police officers that there are in Australia, how can you say that you are not being hypocritical? And if you think these people have been sentenced and done their time in jail are still a risk to the community, then shouldn't your focus be on rehabilitation services? Shouldn't your focus be on provision of employment, which is the greatest predictor of reducing recidivism? And really, shouldn't your focus be on what are the things we need to do to reduce crime in the first place? Now, I'm not going to talk to the individual cases of the people involved. I'm not going to talk to what they may have done and why they were found guilty. But if you don't allow people to work, if you don't allow people access to education, if you tell people that you've got to live in fear that your life could be tipped apart at any point in time, unless you complete this visa application every few months, are you surprised that sometimes people might not go and sit around, might end up doing things that we would rather they didn't? We've, as a society, as the governments of decades, have created the situation that puts people at risk. And we can avoid all this by creating safe pathways to permanent settlement where people can rebuild their lives in peace. I can't let this go, and I hope I'm not going to use up too much time, but the exploitation of Nauru. Just one thing before I read my points. And we haven't seen anything in the media that the refugee community and the immigrant community are far more law-abiding than the average Australian population. So don't let the example of a few hide the wonderful behaviour of the majority, despite what Australia is doing to them. Nauru was colonised by the Germans, then by the British, invaded by the Japanese in World War II, and then colonised by the Australian. Strip mined of its phosphate, destroying the ecology and destroying the way of life for that isolated community. The National Party, part of the Conservatives in Australia, who represent farmers whose land was enriched and grew crops and made more money because of the phosphate that was spread on their land. Do we hear the National Party saying, we owe a debt to Nauru and we should be helping them out? Do we hear the National Party saying, we should help Nauru recover from their exploitation? No, we don't. And I know we're talking about Labor Party now, but just the hypocrisy across the parties needs to be exposed, needs to be remembered, and needs to be shared when we're having conversations with people. In 2001, Nauru was broke, couldn't pay, amongst many things, couldn't pay its Medicare bills to Australia when it sent people to Australia for medical treatment. Lo and behold, there was a Tampa crisis, and in the twisted minds of John Howard and Andrew Downer, they could solve two non-problems in one point by giving Nauru a revenue stream and by putting people who should be protected and should be given a pathway to security by putting them onto Nauru. Rudd and Gillard started again in 2012 and billions of dollars have been spent, but the lives of the people on Nauru have not improved other than a very small amount who have benefited from the corruption. And in 2025, rather than Australia recognising that the debt it owes to Nauru, because we've grown these crops on land that became more productive for a land that we devastated, it's just adding another layer of corruption and disruption to a vulnerable country. Hypocrisy again. So I don't call that building a stronger Pacific community as espoused by our Prime Minister. I call it hypocrisy. Now, I focused on the people that have been talked about in the media recently, but as was mentioned, this law impacts numerous communities. And we heard about that today. So what do we do? Now, I'm going to talk about a story I read in the media in recent days about what happened in 1920s America. Right? And I ask you to bear with me here. because it's occurring in a country that has a litany of its own faults and problems, but seems to be going down an even darker path at the moment. Some may say it's just a more blatant version of existing trends, but bear with me. In the 1920s, the Ku Klux Klan was everywhere in America. We don't hear about it in the popular histories, but it's true. They had women's auxiliaries and they even had kiddie Klan groups. They paraded in Washington in their tens of thousands, and the crowds were there cheering 16. Obviously, they were anti-black, but they were anti-Semitic, they were anti-Catholic, they were anti-immigrants, basically anti-anyone who was not white, Protestant, American first. Might have sounds familiar. And they were ever ready to punch down, literally, violently, on any vulnerable community. They were in the state assemblies, they were in the judiciary, the police, and they often made up the juries in court cases. And not everyone supported the Klan, but most didn't make waves. They didn't oppose it. Life was just easier if you went along. And the Klansmen kept their identity secret, so it was a bit hard to know who was actually in the Klan. But not everyone ignored the Klan. And these are the fascists of the time, let's be honest. Or worse. In small town Muncie, Indiana, there was a local newspaper owner and editor, and he hated the Klan. George Dale printed the names of Klansmen in his paper. He published the fact that a local judge was a Klansman. George Dale was shot, had his home broken into, was shot at and nearly killed. He was ended up being put in prison so often that the inmates would cheer each time that he came back in. He persisted. He nearly went bankrupt. He lost his home. He lost advertisers for his paper. But he persisted in his opposition. And within a few years, George Dale was elected mayor of Muncie. He sacked the entire police force. He cleared the Klansmen out from Muncie, and similar battles occurred elsewhere in America. Now, I'm not going to say that Muncie turned into a progressive bastion of freedom and progressive rights for all. And I'm not saying that America is free of a long list of flaws and faults. But if not for the likes of people like George Muncie, who stood up to the Klan in the 1920s, the fascists of their time, it could have been a lot worse for a lot longer, could have been a lot worse a lot sooner for a much longer time. And sadly, we see it could be getting much worse at the current, as people forget those battles that were fought 100 years ago. So the battle against hypocrisy, attacks on vulnerable people, can be fought. And we can achieve victories, and we have seen victories. In Australia, the campaign to support refugees and people seeking asylum have been won against the government of both parties. We got the children off Nauru, and then we got everyone off Nauru, albeit some are being sent back there. We saw baby Asher not sent back into detention when doctors and health workers upheld their principles of making sure that health treatment was provided and that the baby was kept in a safe, healthy environment. We saw the Medevac legislation eventually get passed, and then we campaigned and we made sure that the men were freed from the hotels by the Liberal government when we showed that they would not be forgotten. We made sure that those men would not be forgotten and they were released into the community. We saw the power of community support when a town got together, and we saw freedom given to Priya, Nades and their family, even though we know that many, many more still need permanent visas today. So governments and oppositions make this a policy because they want to distract people from the real issues, the housing crisis, cost of living, inaction on climate change and more. So we must fight these policies and we must fight the mindset behind them. We must fight them in the courts, but the battle won't be won in the courts alone. We must march in the streets so people know that the numbers are strong. We must contact MPs and senators and send them a message any way we can that these policies are wrong and that there are a volume and numbers of people that are opposed to them. We must support and we must vote for political parties that oppose this legislation. There will be an election shortly, and there are very strong trends that it will be a hung parliament. And we need people on the crossbenches that oppose these policies. And we must have these conversations with friends, with families, with workmates, with other community groups that we're involved in, because sadly, most people don't know about this, and all they're fed is the fear story. So we need to feed them the facts, and you need to have those conversations, and you need to give people the facts, and you need to show them why the government is doing this. And then one other issue that you need to bring up with people is, if the government can do this to one vulnerable community, and once they've done that, who else are they going to target next? So I guess after that, the key thing that I would say is join RAC. Get involved in RAC. Come along to RAC meetings. Those of you on Zoom, come along to an actual, as many as we can get together every week. We meet here on Mondays and oppose this. We'll be having rallies shortly. Join our rallies. Do something rather than just thump the table and get outraged by it. Let people know that this is wrong. Let your friends know this is wrong. Let the MPs and the people in government know this is wrong. And if we do that, we can push back against these policies as we have successfully done before. Thank you.
Thank you, Kieran, and thank you so much, Josephine and Rathy as well. Those were all really great and very informative and motivating speeches. So just to follow on there, just one question from me. Kieran, you nicely listed quite a few ways in which people can get involved and ways in which these measures can be opposed. And both of you did mention there are these upcoming protests and groups to join. And Josephine, you talked about helping make sure that people are educated and understand the measures because they were slid through. Do any of you have any further suggestions that you would give for people to get involved and ways in which these measures can be opposed?
Probably nothing that we haven't already touched on. I think everything that Kieran said is super important, having these conversations within our own spheres of influence and the people who will listen to us, if that's our family or our friends, or once the election is called, people are going to come knocking on your door and hand you leaflets, and that's the time to be asking, where do you stand on these issues? Because this is where I stand. And just on the sort of awareness point, I think I put it in my slides, but if anybody needs like more detail or more help to really understand the nitty-gritty of these laws, we've published a bunch of explainers, like little fact sheets. If you need more resources, they're on our website. So yeah, read up, stay informed. That's all I would say.
I'm going to say some things. If the government, mostly lots of Tamil, all the community, whoever the refugees in Limpopo for 12 years, they still can't study. Who are the young refugees? After the 12th standard, they can't continue the further study by the uni. So if they can't give us a visa, that's fine for mom and dad. But I'm asking the government, please give us a visa for their study. They have to give the study rights for them. Please don't stop their future. They are going to every child has a different goals and ambitions. But I don't want to. Please don't mess up their life. So that's the only things I'm asking the government why they are doing like this. When we walked, whatever you guys mentioned, Kieran mentioned that because the most of the people doesn't know what's happening. Who are the refugees? What they are doing? They don't have no idea. When we walk, they asking, "Oh, really? Are you guys in for 12 years?" Is it true? Yeah, of course. We are living this part of the community for 12 years, but still now they don't know what's happening to our land. So please spread the word. That's the only thing we will ask. Because refugee life is not easy because we came from the persecution. Really, really brutal, that again has happening, what's happening in our life at the moment. Please support us. So that's the only thing I'm asking. Thank you so much. Thank you very much.
Yes. Sorry, just one other activity I will just do a quick promo for. We will have the big walk for refugees coming up in around the June to be confirmed, but likely to be around in June, which will be after the election most likely. So that's another activity, and the advantage of that is that it's Australia-wide. You can do your walking wherever, and we can capture it virtually, and that's another way you can bring people involved. So people who may not come to a rally, may not be comfortable coming to a rally, they can do a walk, and you can walk with someone and have a conversation, and that's another way of bringing people into this issue in a way that may make sense to them. So look for different ways to bring people into the conversation, because they're not going to get this message from the mainstream media. And it's so easy for social media to, as we said earlier, which thrives on outrage. Social media is not going to tell the story of the nurse, of the asylum seeker who's on a temporary visa, who is the most favoured person in an old age home because they are providing great care and support for someone. But their lives are at risk, even though they are doing a great service. Social media isn't going to tell the story about the people who started businesses. Social media isn't going to tell the people about people who are on temporary visas paying taxes. None of those stories get circulated around, and none of those stories get put up in the mainstream media or social media. And they're the conversations you need to have. And yeah, the walk is another way of trying to get that. It's another method of trying to get those messages out there.
Thank you, Kieran. So now we'll go to questions from the audience. We'll take, obviously, at the same time, a combination of in-person and online. So if you're online, you could put your hand up with the hand up gesture thing, or you can put your actual hand up. And I'll do my best to go in the order that we see them. We've got we've got a question from RAC Sydney. We've got a question from Max as well. Should we kick off with Max and then we'll go to RAC Sydney, and you over there as well? Yes, Max.
Josephine, your organisation very recently published an excellent information advocacy document focusing mainly on the right to housing. Congratulations. I've written, have you received my letter? There's a problem with it in one way. Okay. Because it goes to other rights as well. What this document relies on is an international covenant on economic, social and cultural rights, which Australia became a party to in 1976. And apart from the right to housing, it's a right to work, to education, and a whole raft of rights. And many of them are things that the asylum seekers and refugees are being deprived of. But what your brilliant pamphlet, your document didn't mention, was that there's a recommendation coming to Parliament from the Human Rights Committee of the Parliament saying that in effect, that international covenant should not be followed anymore. So I'll mention that RAC, we made a submission to this committee about what they're going to do, and I won't take up time in question, but I'll tell you other stuff that might be assistance of your excellent organisation.
Thank you, Matt.
Thanks, Max. We can probably take that offline, but it's a great observation. I think human rights standards are under attack in all areas of our legal system and other systems. And you're very right to point out those other aspects that weren't touched on in the report. So thank you, and I'm sure we'll continue that conversation.
Thank you. And sorry, before we go online as well, you had your hand up first.
Look, I just wanted to just mention a couple of things in terms of suggestions for moving forward. I get a lot of my information about what's happening with refugees, not just here from Rathy and from Refugee Week and from asylum seekers camp. And there are three things that Rathy mentioned today that I thought were really important. The trauma and genocide that has happened in those countries just in time. And recently we've had Fatima Payman say some absolutely incorrect things about what's happening to people in Iran, which has led to refugees coming in because of ignorance. And the idea that people don't need to know about geopolitics is what's contributing to their lack of understanding about the trauma that refugees have experienced. which will also account, by the way, at trauma for why they might be committing crimes and doing like other antisocial. Now, recently, a Tamil refugee passed away, and Aaron Malvanahan wrote a really brilliant post explaining the steps that led to that. It was heartbreaking to read, but it was almost like once I read it, I thought, it was anticipated. What did we think was going to happen when people were stuck in this situation? But instead, I think what happens is the government talks about refugees as though they're asking for help, and they're less than human. What the refugees have survived is phenomenal, that they've got this far. Atik's got a brilliant story, which I can't do justice to, but when I heard it, he talks about what his colleagues thought refugees were, not realising he was a refugee, and he was shocked by their ignorance. That ignorance is coming from government, but we can combat that. And one of the ways we can combat that is Human Rights Watch publishes every 6 months what's happening in Iran, what's happening in Sri Lanka, and it's detailed work, and it just needs to be promoted. But there's also so much in Refugee Wave that can be promoted by all of us, and also Asylum Seekers Campaign, which has a lot of Iranian refugees. There's Parachana refugees who are also writing regularly. But what Parachana refugees have recently told me is they feel that the information they're putting out there is getting lost. So it does need to be amplified, but it needs to be amplified with them as leaders, because they are the ones providing us with the information about where they've left and what their experiences are at the end. And I think the other thing that sort of links to this as well is people have been given different stories. Refugees have been given different stories. I ran into somebody who was told by his local minister something that was really worrying. Now, he hasn't given me permission to share that, but what's happening is people are trying to broker relationships with refugees to encourage them to go home. That was the nutshell of what happened there. And so, and then what he said was, I said to him, how come this wasn't mentioned? And he said, because the person he spoke to scared him so much he went underground. So refugees are feeling so vulnerable at the moment to share, even with us, a friendly group, what's being said to them. But they've got no way of combating that misinformation. So some of the information also needs to be shared within the refugee groups themselves. And sorry, that's all. I want to take one more time, but that's all I wanted to say. But I just thought, thank you, Rathy, for just highlighting all of those issues.
Thank you for those fantastic points. Did anyone want to add anything there? So the next question we have, thank you again, is from RAC Sydney. Let's see if we can hear you.
I hope so. Can you hear that?
Yes.
Okay, great. So I'm Mark. There's about 7 or so of us here and a few other New South Wales people I can see who've joined online, which is great. Thank you to all 3 speakers. I do have a question for Josephine, which I'll come to. I guess if we went back 8 months ago, you had both Claire O'Neill as Home Affairs and Andrew Giles as Immigration in Melbourne. And as soon as Tony Burke got both of those portfolios, we had the 129-day vigil 24/7 outside of his office in Punchbowl. And by way of announcement, I guess we are going there this Sunday, 2 p.m. It's obviously in the context of the election. The election may well even be called on Sunday morning after the WA election, to basically say, don't the starters gun on another race to the bottom with these bills, but also like what's happened to all the fast track people who were there for months. And there's, as we saw in the article, quoting David Shubridge last week, it could take up to 100 years to solve, the fast track legacy caseloads, cases. And, it's just sort of like, how many times have we seen since the introduction of mandatory detention in 1992, where Labor says, we have to do this temporarily, and they totally open the door for the coalition. It's even Keating's introduction with the limits on, mandatory detention in 1992. You think of so many other examples like Rudd's P&G solution. This is only meant to be for a year or two. Abbott and Morrison come in, and I really fear that there's a repeat of this. And that leads me, I guess, to my question for Josephine. Like, when these bills first passed, Labor's trying to say that it's only affecting the NZYQ cohort, but there were figures put around 80,000 potentially exposed to these laws should the coalition interpret them in a much wider way. So I guess I'm wondering whether you could elaborate on that slightly. Like, the fast track people are obviously afraid, as are the ex-offshore cohort, which is much smaller, but you know, what's your sense of the risk there? And yeah, is that I guess the important point about these laws potentially opening the door for the coalition to go much, much further?
Thank you so much. That's a really good question. Of what's been spoken about tonight about just the misinformation or the weaponization of information, and the intentional mistruths being thrown around by politicians. If I could start with the factual answer, it's an absolute lie to suggest that it's only the NZYQ cohort that's affected by these laws. There's nothing in the legislation that limits these powers to that group of 200 and something people. The deportation to third countries power applies to literally any person who is liable for removal. So that, in theory, that could be a tourist whose tourist visa has expired, who's being removed, and instead of being sent back to Belgium, they could be sent to Nauru. Like, that's not going to happen, but the law would allow that to happen. So it's absolutely disingenuous for the government to be out there suggesting that there's any kind of limitations on these powers, and that's why other people are so scared, because we don't know where this is going to end. The government has written itself a blank check, or however you want to describe it, and, you know, maybe thinks that it can control how it wants to use those powers. But obviously, you've hit the nail on the head. The real concern is, where does this stop if we have a change of government? It's a really concerning prospect. You know, we were in Canberra when these laws passed, because we were lobbying furiously to try and stop their passage. But, you know, some of the comments that were floating around at that time were that we were sort of questioning the Liberal strategy in handing the government this sort of political victory. Like, why did they agree to this deal to get this through to, you know, so Labor looks great. And, you know, the Liberals are thinking that these are the kind of laws that they'd never be able to pass if they were in government. This is their Christmas and birthdays all come at once. So yeah, but yeah, just to go back to sort of the issue of sort of numbers, like, there are a lot of different powers in these laws, and they all sort of apply to different people in different circumstances. But I think it's definitely fair to say that anybody who the government considers should be leaving Australia is potentially going to be facing the impacts of these laws in the near future.
Thank you. The next was, did you have a response to that? Yeah, go for it, Eladia.
Hi, my name's Eladia. One of the many hats I wear is working on a criminal deportation ARC review with Leanne Weaver and Alison Gerard up at the University of Canberra. And just to kind of add to what you're saying, and to come back to what our host was saying before, people already are being deported under this kind of criminal deportation thing. People outside of refugee groups, and they're deported everywhere, to New Zealand, to Europe, anywhere. and they very much are already subject to these. And you see it turning up through the legal process as well as influencing the way the judges think about the way they sentence people as well. So just for information for people in the room, these processes already do affect a wide, and to respond to the thing, do affect a wide range of groups. And I forgot another comment, but it was to link back to this criminalisation that I'll speak about. So.
Thank you so much, Josephine. And next we had a response from David, and then Tom, and then back to. So over to you, David.
Yeah, thanks. I think we need to understand how high the stakes are, because it is the fast track people like Rathy. It is the Medevac people like Moz and Farhad and people we've learnt to love over the last many years. It is all sorts of people who are under the gun, but it's actually us as well. Because what has happened with Labour on these bills fits very neatly, unfortunately, into what is happening on a global scale. You look at the United States and you look at most parts of Europe, and the fear that is being engendered against refugees is being used to ramp up responses where the centre and soft left parties give way and say, we will be tough on these people. And in doing so, they legitimise the far right. And I'm talking about people who are further right than Peter Dutton. And, you know, the idea of a Dutton government, it will put, shivers down our spine. And every time a Labour government or an SPD government in Germany or whatever, every time they give ground and they say, we will be tough on refugees, they actually make it more legitimate for the far right to ramp up hatred. And the victims of that hatred are not just the refugees themselves, they're the first victims. But the far right in Europe is looking to victimise women over abortion rights. They're going for trans rights. There are workplaces in Germany where there are supporters of the AfD who will not let union organisers in the door. So workers lose out as well. And I think all of that emphasises for me that what we do as RAC, as refugee organisations like the one that Rathy leads, what we do really matters, not just for the individuals who are the focus of that attention, but for stopping the shift, a broader shift to the right inside society. And I think one of the things that Kieran said, I think, cannot be emphasised enough. None of us here want a Dutton government, but we will fight the Albanese government if it gets back in just as fiercely as Dutton, because at the end of the day, fighting for refugee rights is fighting against racism and is fighting for a better society. So none of us are going to vote for the Liberals, but none of us are going to give Albanese an easy pass either now, during the election, or if he wins minority government afterwards.
Well said, David.
Any response from the panelists? Or? So next we had a response from Tom.
Yeah, I think we have a big political task ahead of us in terms of busting the myths and the lies from the Labour government and from Dutton as well on refugees. I think it is, and building the fight back against every part of this policy, every step of the way, as all these laws as well. I think I'm just reflecting on how Labour coming into power said that no one would be held back, no one would be left behind, and they said they'd have a firm but fair, or something of those words, refugee policy. Now we know that there's no such thing. We know day one they turned back a boat carrying I think camel asylum seekers as well. We know that that's never been the case, and they're committed to offshore deterrence. At the same time, I think thousands of people who welcomed and cheered the end of the absolutely racist Morrison government. This is the government that had the statue of I turned these back of the boats on his office, welcomed Labour and thought that Labour coming into power would mean something different for refugees. I think these laws are an absolute betrayal can be felt as an absolute betrayal for all of those people. And so I think we've seen under Morrison how mass public opinion can be turned towards refugees. Actually, ASRC did a poll recently where 69% of Labour voters, and I think even more Greens voters, obviously, supported refugees and supported, refugees having access to jobs, being able to work and being able to study. Now, I don't know if there's similar polling around this particular bill, because they've obviously tried to scapegoat, using the hard on crime stuff. But I think the lesson from Morrison shows that you can shift that quite considerably. I think the other thing to note is that I think there's far more anger against Labour in general at the moment. I think over Palestine, I think that's massive. I think over cost of living, that's massive. And that's why we say actually refugees are the problem. It's the government, it's the employers that are not giving pay rises. And on unions as well, of the CFM being put into administration. So I think there is a much broader base that we can tap into and unite. And it's great. I saw that letter that was on your slideshow as well showed how many of the refugee organizations have come out against the bill. So I think we have a lot of work to do, but I think there's also a big opportunity to build that broad opposition as well to these policies.
Thank you. Any further responses? Should we go? Yes, Peter.
This will sound very strange. I'm a long-term member of RAC, and I support its values and its policy. Now, listen to all the speeches, and really there is nothing that I would disagree with from what you said. That is the legal, the emotional, the RAC speaker, Kieran. So all of you have expressed something that's very important, and we all think that this should be much more widely spread around. Now, I did a very naughty thing. I thought the Victorian State Labour Council, Victorian Trade and Labour Council, has put on the website, the Facebook, a proposal saying, well, we are going to act, the council, to make life impossible or hard and difficult for Peter Dutton. I thought I could subscribe to that, and I did. They were asking for money, so I gave them some money. And in the notice on Facebook, it said, well, why don't you put this on Facebook? Which I did. Didn't appear. I sent it to some friends, to a couple of my children. They didn't get any of them. So if this is paranoia, there it is. But I've done it. And I think it's important that we, even if we have obstacles, we keep going and do what we can. Thank you.
Yes, Olivia.
Hi. The first thing I was thinking about is obviously once people were taken off Nauru, Australia had a period of continuing to pay Nauru to kind of keep the lights on. And again, as you said at the start, it's no surprise whatsoever that the Nauru is the first country to be named. And I guess I was thinking about the parallels between this system that's emerging and what, say, has happened with the US, with Costa Rica, and Panama, as well as the precedent set by the UK with their attempt to engage Rwanda in a similar form. So I guess I was thinking about that historical precedent, as well as how fast this response to the NZYQ verdict occurred, as if it were kind of bubbling along in the background, perhaps. So that's one thought that I was perhaps for a bit of meditation on, the precedent, the kind of political precedent for this, and how long these things have been on the boiler, waiting for the perfect crisis moment to release it. I don't know how much we know about that. I wonder if it's worth thinking about and considering. And the second kind of thing that I was going to ask about is just about the legal power. Of course, the first 3 deportations are being challenged, and that's kind of being put on ice momentarily. But do we know very much about the capacity to block some of these things? So, for example, the overturning of NZYQ was based on the fact that it's actually unconstitutional, and I'm wondering if some of those constitutional powers can, at least in the Australian context, if not the British or the American context, actually stand up to what's going on. And none of that's to suggest that the framework of this is in any way permissible, but I wonder what kind of legal power is and also isn't there. I guess just hand it over to you.
Great questions. To the first part of what you were saying, how terrifying is it that Australia could move with such speed to set up an arrangement like this with Nauru, and that's all down to the history, as Kieran was talking about, of this exploited relationship that Australia's had with Nauru for such a long time. That the government was able to click its fingers, and here is this scheme pursuant to which we are paying an untold amount of money. I'll leave that there. But also that's an example that the rest of the conservative governments around the world look to and take inspiration from. It's terrifying and appalling and deeply shameful for all of us. As to your questions about the potential legal challenges to the scheme more broadly, it's a really good question. I think we'll have to keep a close eye on, firstly, how these 3 cases in the courts play out. Some of those cases relate really specifically to the individuals involved and their personal circumstances. There may be arguments playing out in those cases, or at least some of them, that relate more systemically to the removal powers. Or if that doesn't get tested in these cases, then if this government or a subsequent government attempts further deportations, there might be other legal challenges that could be brought. The constitutional question is a big one. The government obviously lost NZYQ, lost another really crucial High Court case that was based on the constitutional doctrine of the separation of powers and the limits on the government's ability to exact punishment. So the government is really, really alive to the potential for a constitutional challenge and has framed these powers really specifically to try and avoid that. So it's going to be tricky, is all I would say at this point.
Thank you so much, Josephine. And it's just about 8 now. So I think we'll close it up there, unless someone had a very short statement or question they wanted to ask very quickly. No, just say thank you so much to our speakers, to Josephine, Rathy and Kieran. That was fantastic, and some really fantastic points were made from all of you here as well. So thank you so much. And